The Grand Hall of the Apex Spire was the largest enclosed space Nathan Cole had ever seen. It was shaped like the inside of a sphere, and hundreds of floating platforms hung at different heights, each one carrying the delegation of a different species. Soft blue light came from every direction, making it impossible to tell where the walls ended and the empty air began. The effect was meant to make every delegation feel equal, suspended together in shared space. Nathan had always thought it felt more like floating in an ocean, where everything wanted to eat you. The human platform was positioned near the middle tier, not too high, not too low. Nathan stood at the front with his translation device clipped to his collar. Laura sat behind him at a small console, where she could monitor communications and feed him information. Commander Ethan Marsh stood near the back of the platform, straight and still, his dress uniform sharp, and his eyes moving slowly across the chamber. The session was called to order by the council moderator, a member of the Hilari species whose voice carried across the hall through the acoustic systems built into every surface. Then, High Arbiter Zorath of the Vellani Dominion rose to speak. Zorath was tall even by Vellani standards, with pale silver skin and long fingers that moved slowly as he talked, a gesture that among the Vellani signaled authority and patience. His voice was deep and smooth, and he spoke in the common galactic tongue with the ease of someone who had been making speeches for longer than most human nations had existed. He began by praising the Council and its long history of keeping peace among the stars. He spoke of the great wars that had nearly torn the galaxy apart centuries ago, and how the Council had been built to prevent such things from happening again. He spoke of balance, of order, of the responsibility that came with power. And then, slowly, carefully, he turned his words toward humanity. In the span of barely 2 centuries, the species known as humans have expanded from a single world to over 90 colonized systems, Zorath said. Their military capability has grown at a rate that has no equal in the recorded history of this council. Their merchant fleets now operate in regions of space that were, until recently, the stable domain of species who have maintained peace there for generations. We do not question the right of any species to grow. But growth without restraint is not progress, it is a threat. He went on for a long time. He presented charts and numbers that showed human expansion compared to every other species. He cited 3 separate border incidents where human patrol ships had clashed with alien vessels, presenting each one as evidence of aggression rather than what they actually were, which was self-defense against pirate attacks. He painted a picture of a galaxy being slowly overrun by a species that did not know its place. When he finished, several allied delegations spoke in support. The Torvani, who had long been Vellani trading partners, called for immediate action. The Seleth, a nervous species that feared everything larger than themselves, said they could not sleep knowing that human warships patrolled so close to their borders. One by one, the voices stacked up against humanity. Then, it was Nathan's turn. He stood and looked around the chamber. Hundreds of alien faces looked back at him. Some were hostile, some were curious. A few, very few, looked sympathetic. He took a breath and began. 17 months ago, a seismic event on the Rathani colony world of Savan 3 triggered a volcanic chain reaction that threatened to destroy every settlement on the northern continent. The Rathani emergency fleet was stationed too far away to respond in time. It was a human relief squadron that arrived first. Our ships evacuated 40,000 Rathani civilians in 9 hours. Not because we were asked, because we were close and it was the right thing to do. He paused and let that sit in the air. 8 months before that, pirate fleets operating out of the Drell Nebula attacked trade convoys belonging to 6 different species. Those attacks had been going on for years, and no one had been able to stop them. A joint human task force went into the nebula, found the pirate bases, and destroyed them. Trade in that region has been safe ever since. You are welcome. A murmur passed through the chamber. Nathan continued. You have heard numbers today about how fast humanity has grown. Those numbers are real. But here is another number. In the 10 years since human merchants entered the Galactic Trade Network, overall commerce in the systems where we operate has increased by 31%. We did not take anyone's prosperity. We created more of it. He looked directly at Zorath's platform. The Containment Accord asks this council to restrict a sovereign species' right to exist and expand, based on the fear that we might become a problem someday. Not because we have done anything wrong, not because we have broken any law or treaty, but because we are growing, and that makes some people uncomfortable. Nathan shook his head. This council was built on the idea that every species has the right to find its own path among the stars. If you pass this accord, you are saying that right only applies to species that the Vellani approve of. And if you are willing to do that to us today, ask yourselves which species will be next. He sat down. The chamber was quiet for a moment, and Nathan allowed himself a small hope that his words had changed some minds. Then the moderator announced that a procedural motion had been filed to fast-track the vote on the Containment Accord, bypassing the standard 30-day deliberation period. Nathan felt his stomach drop. A fast-track vote meant no time for further debate, no time to build alliances, no time to negotiate amendments. It was a move designed to ram the accord through before opposition could organize. The procedural motion passed with a comfortable margin. The vote on the accord itself would take place within the hour. Nathan turned to Laura. She was already looking at her console, her face tight. She shook her head slightly and sent him a message on his private screen. 62% committed to voting yes. We cannot win this. He read the message and deleted it. Then he looked at Ethan, who met his eyes with a steady gaze. Ethan gave the smallest nod, a gesture that said he understood what was coming and was ready. Nathan stood again. He pressed the button to request the floor, and the moderator recognized him. Before this vote proceeds, Nathan said, his voice calm and clear, I wish to formally request a recess so that the human delegation may consult with our government on Earth. Zorath responded immediately, as if he had been expecting this. The matter before this council is urgent. A recess is not warranted. The vote will proceed as scheduled. You are denying a member delegation the right to consult with their own government before a vote that will directly affect their sovereignty, Nathan asked. The procedures are clear, Ambassador Cole. The motion to fast-track has passed. We will proceed. Nathan looked around the chamber one more time. He saw the faces of hundreds of species, most of them watching him with the detached curiosity of people who had already made up their minds. He saw the Rathani delegation, who looked uncomfortable but said nothing. He saw the Dravasi, who sat with their arms crossed, waiting. He saw the Vellani, arranged on their platform like judges who had already written the sentence. He reached up and removed the translation device from his collar. Without it, only the humans in the room would understand him. He turned to Laura and Ethan and spoke in plain English. We are leaving. All of us, right now. Do not look back. He placed the device back on his collar. The chamber had gone quiet, every delegation watching him. The human delegation rejects the legitimacy of this vote, Nathan said, his voice carrying across the great hall. We reject the authority of this council to impose restrictions on the sovereign expansion of our species. We reject the Containment Accord in its entirety, and effective immediately, humanity withdraws its membership from the Galactic Council. He turned and walked toward the exit. Laura closed her console and followed. Ethan fell into step behind them, his hand resting near his sidearm out of habit. though he knew the real weapons in this fight were not the kind you could hold. The doors of the grand hall opened before them. Nathan walked through without looking back. Behind him, the chamber erupted. Voices shouted in dozens of alien languages. Platforms shifted as delegations turned to face each other in confusion and alarm. The moderator called for order and was ignored. The humans were gone, and the galaxy would never be the same. The corridors of the Apex Spire had never felt so long. Nathan Cole walked at a steady pace, not fast, not slow, with Laura Bennett on his right and Commander Ethan Marsh on his left. Behind them, 4 junior staff members followed in silence, carrying data cases and personal equipment. None of them spoke. The only sound was their boots on the smooth metal floor and the distant hum of the station systems. They passed groups of alien staff who stopped and stared. Word was already spreading through the station. Nathan could see it in their faces, that particular look of shock that comes when something that was never supposed to happen just did. He kept his eyes forward and his back straight. There would be time for doubt later. Right now, every step they took was being watched, and the way they left would matter almost as much as the fact that they left at all. They reached the docking bay and boarded the Ardent Horizon without ceremony. The moment the airlock sealed, Nathan felt the weight of what he had done settle onto his shoulders like a physical thing. He stood in the corridor of his own ship and let out a slow breath. "Get us moving," he said to the ship's captain through the intercom. "Best speed to human space. Do not stop for anything." The Ardent Horizon pulled away from the Apex Spire and turned toward the stars. Behind them, the great crystal tower grew smaller in the viewport, until it was just another point of light in the dark. Nathan went to the secure communications room and opened a channel to Earth. The face that appeared was Kevin Grant, and this time the Secretary of Defense did not look tired. He looked wide awake and very, very focused. "I watched your speech on the live feed," Grant said. "The whole cabinet watched it. So did the president." "Then you know what I did," Nathan said. "I do, and for what it is worth, nobody in this room thinks you are wrong. But we need to move fast. The Volani will not sit still after this." Nathan nodded. "I am recommending immediate activation of Contingency Protocol Longhorn." Grant did not hesitate. "Already done. Admiral Perry has been briefed. Fleet assets are repositioning as we speak. Every colony world is going to full alert within the next 12 hours. Admiral Lisa Perry appeared on the screen next to Grant. She was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and the kind of calm authority that came from 30 years of commanding warships. "Nathan, I need to know what we are dealing with. Are the Volani going to come at us military, or are they going to try to squeeze us with the other Council species?" "Both," Nathan said. "They will use the Accord to justify a containment perimeter around human space, and they will pressure other species to enforce it. But if we push back, they will not hesitate to use force." "Then we prepare for force," Perry said simply. "I am moving the 3rd Fleet to forward positions along the Volani approach corridors. The 5th Fleet will cover the frontier colonies. We will not start anything, but if they cross the line, we will finish it." Nathan ended the call and found Laura waiting outside the communications room. She had her data pad in her hand, and that particular expression she wore when she was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. "I have been talking to people," she said. "Which people?" "The right ones. Ambassador Pell of the Rafani contacted me privately 10 minutes after we left the chamber. He said our walkout has caused a crisis in the Rathani government. Half their leadership wants to follow our example. The other half is terrified of Volani retaliation." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that humanity values its friendship with the Rathani people, and that we will remember who stood with us and who did not. I kept it polite, but I made the point." Nathan almost smiled. "What about the Dravosi?" "The Dravosi ambassador sent a single message. 3 words. It translates roughly to, "Well played, human." Coming from a Dravosi, that is practically a marriage proposal. Meanwhile, on the apex spire, the Galactic Council was falling apart. The Grand Hall that had been a place of orderly debate just hours ago was now a storm of shouting voices and angry gestures. High Arbiter Zorath stood on his platform and called for calm, but his words were drowned out by the chaos below him. The walkout had cracked something open, and all the resentment and frustration that had been building beneath the surface of galactic politics for decades was now pouring through the gap. Ambassador Pell of the Refani had taken the floor and was speaking with a passion that surprised everyone who knew him as a quiet, careful diplomat. For years, this council has been told that every species has an equal voice, he said, his forearms spread wide, but we all know the truth. The Villani set the agenda. The Villani choose which resolutions move forward and which ones die in committee. The Villani control the trade routes, the military alliances, and the flow of information. The humans saw this for what it was, and they had the courage to walk away. Perhaps we should ask ourselves why we do not. Zorath responded with ice in his voice. The Rathani delegation would do well to remember the benefits it has received from its membership in this council, before making statements it cannot take back. Is that a threat, High Arbiter? Pell asked. Zorath did not answer. He did not need to. Everyone in the chamber understood what he meant. The vote on the containment accord proceeded, but it was not the clean victory Zorath had planned. The accord passed, but the margin was narrower than expected. 14 delegations that had been counted as yes votes either abstained or voted against. The Rathani abstained. The Dravazi voted no and added a formal statement calling the accord an overreach of council authority. 5 smaller species that had never spoken against the Villani in the history of the council voted no for the first time. The accord had legal force, at least on paper, but without the unanimous backing that Zorath had expected, it carried the stain of division. And a divided council was a weak council. Outside the walls of the apex spire, the news spread faster than any ship could travel. Galactic communication networks carried the story to every inhabited world within hours. Video of Nathan's speech and the human walkout was played and replayed on screens across 1,000 planets. The reactions were as varied as the galaxy itself. On Villani worlds, state media painted the humans as dangerous and ungrateful, a young species that had been given too much, too fast, and had now revealed its true nature. On Rafani worlds, public opinion was sharply divided, with large crowds gathering in city squares to debate whether their own government should follow the humans out the door. On Dravasi worlds, warriors raised their weapons in salute, because in their culture, walking away from a fight you could not win, in order to fight on your own terms, was considered one of the highest forms of tactical wisdom. On dozens of smaller worlds, species that had long felt trapped under Villani influence began to whisper about possibilities they had never dared to consider before. Trade officials quietly reached out to human embassies that no longer officially existed, looking for back-channel deals. Military planners ran simulations of what would happen if the Villani tried to enforce the accord by force, and discovered that the numbers were not as one-sided as they had assumed. And on the frontier of human space, something was moving. Villani warships, sleek and silver, began to appear along the boundaries that the containment accord had drawn on the star charts. They did not fire. They did not communicate. They simply took position and waited, like a fence being built around a yard. Admiral Perry watched the reports come in from her command center on Earth, and said nothing for a long time. Then she turned to her staff and gave a single order. Move the fleet forward. Match them ship for ship along the line, and tell every captain the same thing. Do not shoot first, but do not blink. The galaxy held its breath. The humans had walked out of the assembly, and now the assembly had to decide what it was without them. The old order was cracking, and through the cracks, something new was beginning to push through, though no one yet knew what shape it would take. Nathan sat alone in his quarters, aboard the ardent horizon, as it sailed through the dark between stars. He pulled up a map of human space on his screen, and looked at the worlds he was responsible for. 93 colonies, 200 billion people. Farmers and engineers and teachers and soldiers, all of them counting on people like him to keep them safe. He closed the map and opened a blank document. He had letters to write and calls to make. The walkout was done. Now the real work began. The Volani moved faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks of the containment accord passing, enforcement fleets began appearing along the borders, drawn on the Council's star charts. These were not patrol ships or diplomatic escorts. They were warships, heavily armed cruisers with weapon arrays that glowed faintly in the dark of space, arranged in neat lines like soldiers on a parade ground. The message was clear. The cage was being built, and the Volani meant to lock the door. Commander Ethan Marsh had been reassigned the moment the ardent horizon reached human space. Admiral Perry needed experienced officers on the frontier, and Ethan was given command of a destroyer squadron stationed at Farpoint Anchorage, the outermost human military installation. It was a tough posting. The Anchorage was a collection of armored platforms and docking bays, bolted to an asteroid at the edge of nowhere, and the crews stationed there lived with the knowledge that if shooting started, they would be the first ones in the line of fire. Ethan stood in the command center of the Anchorage and watched the sensor screens. Volani ships were visible at the edge of detection range, holding position just outside the boundary they had declared. They had been there for 3 days, doing nothing, saying nothing. The silence was worse than threats. "They are testing us," said his second-in-command, a young lieutenant named Karen Holt. "They want to see if we flinch." "Then we do not flinch," Ethan said. The real crisis came 6 days later, and it came not at Farpoint, but at a small colony world called New Helena. It was a farming planet, green and quiet, home to 200,000 people who had come there to build something simple and good. New Helena sat just outside the narrow corridor of space that the containment accord allowed for human habitation, which meant that according to the Volani, it should not exist at all. Governor Diane Harper received the notification on a Tuesday morning. A Volani enforcement flotilla had entered the system and was demanding that all human residents prepare for immediate relocation. The colony was to be evacuated within 72 hours. Any resistance would be met with appropriate measures. Diane was 53 years old, born on a colony ship, raised on a frontier world, and not the kind of woman who's scared easily. She read the notification twice, then walked to her office window and looked out at the fields that stretched to the horizon. Her people had spent 8 years turning bare rock into farmland. They had planted crops, built schools, and buried their dead in that soil. She was not going to let anyone take it from them. "This is Governor Harper of New Helena. We are being told to leave our homes. We are not leaving. Send help." The message reached Admiral Perry within the hour. Perry did not waste time with meetings or committees. She pulled up the fleet roster, found the nearest carrier group with enough firepower to make a statement, and gave the order. The heavy cruiser Valor of Carolina and its escort squadron would depart immediately for New Helena. The Valor of Carolina was commanded by Captain Ryan Cole. He was 36 years old, 10 years younger than his brother Nathan. And while Nathan had chosen words as his weapon, Ryan had chosen ships. He was a quiet man who did not talk much about his famous brother, but those who served under him knew that the same stubbornness ran in both of them. Ryan had never lost a ship, never lost an engagement, and he did not intend to start now. His task force dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the New Helena system and immediately found what they expected to find. The Volani flotilla was in orbit around the planet, 6 warships arranged in a crescent formation, with their weapons pointed down at the colony. It was a blockade in everything but name. Ryan opened a channel on the common frequency. "This is Captain Ryan Cole of the human cruiser Valor of Carolina to the Volani Enforcement Flotilla. You are in orbit around a sovereign human colony world. You will withdraw your vessels to a distance of no less than 50,000 kilometers from the planet. You have 1 hour to comply." The response came from the Volani commander, a smooth voice that sounded almost bored. "Captain Cole, the colony on the surface of this world exists in violation of the Containment Accord as ratified by the Galactic Council. We are here to enforce the lawful resolution of this council. You are ordered to stand down and allow the evacuation to proceed." "Humanity withdrew from the Galactic Council," Ryan replied. "Your accord has no authority over us. I will say it one more time. Pull back your ships, or we will consider your presence here an act of aggression against the civilian population." The Volani commander did not respond. The flotilla held position. Ryan looked at his tactical officer and gave a small nod. The Valor of Carolina and its escorts moved into a formation that placed them directly between the Volani ships and the planet below. It was the oldest move in naval warfare. You put your body between the threat and the thing you are protecting, and you dare the other side to go through you. On the surface, Diane Harper watched the standoff from her office. She had ordered all civilians to stay indoors, but she knew that many of them were standing in their yards, looking up at the sky, trying to see the ships that would decide their fate. She kept her communication channel to the Valor of Carolina open and listened to every word. While the standoff played out above New Helena, Nathan was fighting a different kind of battle thousands of light years away. He had spent the past 2 weeks in secret meetings with representatives of species that had grown tired of Volani dominance. The Rathani had finally committed, sending Ambassador Pell to a hidden meeting point on a neutral station. The Dravasi sent their senior military commander, a scarred veteran named Thovak, who spoke little, but listened to everything. 5 other species sent representatives, smaller nations that had lived in the Volani shadow for too long and were ready to step into the light. Together, they drafted what Nathan called the Somerset Declaration. It was a simple document, only 3 pages long, but every word had been chosen with care. The declaration stated that no species or group of species had the right to restrict the sovereign expansion of another. It called for a new framework of galactic cooperation based on mutual respect rather than hierarchy. And it invited every species in the galaxy to add their name. Laura had spent days refining the language, making sure it would translate cleanly into every major alien tongue. Ethan, participating by secure link from Farpoint, reviewed the military implications and confirmed that the species signing the declaration had enough combined fleet strength to make the Volani think twice about using force. When the document was ready, Nathan gave the order to transmit it on every open communication channel in the galaxy. Every world, every station, every ship with a receiver heard the Somerset Declaration at the same moment. There was no hiding it, no controlling the narrative. It was out there for everyone to read and everyone to judge. The effect was immediate. On the Apex Spire, Zorath received a copy and read it in silence. His advisors reported that within hours of the transmission, 4 more species had contacted the Human Diplomatic Office requesting information about how to add their names. The old order was not just cracking, it was breaking. Above New Helena, the standoff entered its 2nd day. Ryan's ships and the Volani flotilla sat facing each other across a thin strip of empty space, weapons hot, crews at battle stations. Ryan had not slept. He stood on the bridge of the Valor of Carolina and watched the Volani ships on his tactical display, 6 bright dots that had not moved in 18 hours. Karen Holt, now transferred from Farpoint to serve as liaison on the Valor, handed him a cup of coffee. "The crew is steady," she said, "but they are tired. Everyone wants to know how this ends." "It ends one of two ways," Ryan said. "They leave, or they do not." "And if they do not?" Ryan did not answer. He did not need to. They both knew what would happen if the Volani opened fire on a human colony. It would not be a skirmish or a border incident. It would be the beginning of a war that would burn across the galaxy. He took a sip of the coffee and watched the screen. The Volani ships sat in their crescent formation, like a closed fist. His own ships held the line like an open hand, palm out, waiting. On every world in the galaxy, people watched and waited with them. The Rithani, the Dravasi, the Selith, the Torvani. Species that had been enemies for centuries, and species that had never met each other before. All of them watching the same patch of space above a small green farming world, where 200,000 people had refused to leave their homes. The galaxy balanced on the edge of a knife, and the knife was getting sharper by the hour. The break came on the third morning of the standoff. Captain Ryan Cole was standing on the bridge of the Valor of Carolina, with a cold cup of coffee in his hand, and sand in his eyes, when his communications officer looked up from her console with an expression he had never seen on her face before. It was confusion, mixed with something that might have been hope. "Captain, 3 of the Volani allied ships in the flotilla are powering down their weapons and breaking formation." Ryan set the coffee down. "Which ones?" "The Torvani frigate and both Selith corvettes. They are pulling away from the crescent and moving to a neutral distance. The Torvani captain is broadcasting a message on the open channel. He says his government has reviewed the Somerset Declaration and has instructed him to withdraw from all enforcement operations related to the Containment Accord." Ryan watched the tactical display as 3 of the 6 dots drifted away from the formation, leaving gaps in the crescent like missing teeth. The Volani flotilla, which had looked so solid and threatening just hours ago, now looked thin and unbalanced. "What about the Volani ships?" he asked. "Holding position, but their weapons are still hot." Ryan walked to the front of the bridge and looked out the viewport. Somewhere below them, 200,000 people were waking up to another morning on a world they had built with their own hands. He thought about Governor Diane Harper, who had refused to leave. He thought about the farmers and the teachers and the children who had never known any home but New Helena. He thought about his brother Nathan, who had walked out of the most powerful assembly in the galaxy because it was the right thing to do. He opened the common channel. "Volani flotilla, this is Captain Cole. 3 of your allied vessels have withdrawn. You are now outnumbered and outgunned. I am offering you the chance to withdraw with your ships and your dignity intact. Take it." There was silence on the channel for what felt like a very long time. Ryan could picture the Volani commander on the other side, weighing his orders against the reality of what he was facing. The Containment Accord might have been law on the Apex Spire, but law did not mean much when your allies were leaving, and the ships pointing at you were bigger than yours. The response came in a clipped, formal tone. "Human vessel, this flotilla has received new orders from the Volani Dominion. We are withdrawing from this system. This action does not constitute recognition of your claims or acceptance of your so-called declaration. The Containment Accord remains in force." "You are welcome to believe that," Ryan said. "Safe travels." He watched the 3 remaining Volani ships turn and accelerate out of the system. Within minutes, they were gone, and the space above New Helena was clear. A cheer went up from the bridge crew, quiet at first and then louder. The kind of sound that people make when they have been holding their breath for 3 days and can finally let it go. On the surface, Diane Harper stepped out of her office and looked up at a sky that was empty of warships for the first time in 72 hours. She walked to the edge of the government building's front steps and stood there in the morning light, and around her, people began to come out of their homes. They stood in their doorways and in their gardens, and on the dirt roads between their fields, and they looked up, and they knew that they were staying. Diane did not make a speech. She did not need to. She simply stood there and breathed, and that was enough. Thousands of light years away, on the apex spire, High Arbiter Zorath was facing the worst day of his political life. The Somerset Declaration had torn through the galactic community like a fire through dry grass. In the 4 days since its broadcast, over 20 species had formally endorsed it. 12 of those had been council members. The Rathani had gone further than endorsement. Ambassador Pell had stood before the council and announced that the Rathani were withdrawing their membership entirely. The Dravosi followed within the hour. 4 smaller species added their names before the day was over. The Galactic Council, which had governed the affairs of hundreds of species for centuries, was bleeding members. The Grand Hall that had been full of floating platforms just weeks ago now had empty spaces where delegations used to sit, dark gaps in the blue light like wounds that would not close. Zorath called an emergency meeting of the remaining members. He stood on his platform and looked out at a chamber that was smaller than it had been the last time he spoke. And he made one final attempt to hold things together. He offered to renegotiate the containment accord. He offered concessions on trade routes and military protocols. He offered a new committee to review the council structure and address the concerns that had been raised. But the offers came too late, and everyone in the room knew it. The species that remained were there not out of loyalty to the council, but out of fear of the Villani. And fear was not a foundation strong enough to build anything lasting on. The meeting ended without agreement, and Zorath returned to his quarters alone. Nathan Cole received the invitation on a quiet evening aboard the Ardent Horizon. It came not from the old council, but from the coalition of species that had signed the Somerset Declaration. They asked him to attend a summit on neutral ground at a small station called Meridian Point that orbited a dim red star in unclaimed space. The purpose of the summit was simple: to build something new. He traveled there with Laura and Ethan, who had been promoted to full captain after the standoff at New Helena. When they arrived at Meridian Point, Nathan was surprised by what he found. The station was modest, nothing like the grand crystal tower of the apex spire. It was a plain structure of metal and glass, functional rather than beautiful. But inside its main hall, representatives of over 30 species had gathered, seated at a simple circular table where every chair was the same height. There were no floating platforms here. No one looked down on anyone else. The summit lasted 5 days. The debates were long and sometimes heated, because building something new is always harder than tearing something old down. But the tone was different from anything Nathan had experienced at the old council. There was a willingness to listen that had never existed in the Grand Hall. Species that had been rivals for generations sat next to each other and talked about shared problems and common goals, and when they disagreed, they worked through it instead of retreating to their corners. On the 5th day, they signed the Meridian Compact. It was a new framework for galactic cooperation, built on 3 principles. First, that every species had the right to determine its own path without interference. Second, that trade should be open and fair, without any single species controlling the routes. Third, that collective defense was a shared responsibility, not a tool for the powerful to control the weak. The delegates asked Nathan to serve as the Compact's first rotating chair, a symbolic position that would pass to a different species every year. He accepted, not because he wanted the title, but because he understood what it meant. The galaxy was watching, and the fact that they chose a human to lead this new beginning said something important about what the walkout had meant to all of them. When the ceremony was over, and the delegates had returned to their ships, Nathan stood alone at a viewport in the main hall of Meridian Point. Laura found him there, staring out at the stars, with his hands clasped behind his back. "You look like a man who just changed the galaxy and is not sure how to feel about it," she said. "I did not change anything," Nathan said. "I walked out of a room. Everything that happened after that was because a lot of people in a lot of different places decided they were tired of the way things were. I just opened the door." Laura stood beside him and looked at the stars. "That is usually how it starts," she said. Far away, on the surface of New Helena, Captain Ryan Cole walked through the colony's central settlement. Governor Harper had invited him down to see the world his ships had protected. She led him to the edge of town where the farmland began, and they stood together looking at fields of golden grain that stretched all the way to the mountains on the horizon. The sky was pale blue, almost like Earth's sky, and the wind carried the smell of growing things. "This is what we were fighting for," Diane said. "Not territory, not politics. This." Ryan looked at the fields and thought about the 3 days he had spent on the bridge of his ship, staring at the tactical display, waiting for the shooting to start. He thought about the moment when the Volani ships turned and left, and the sound his crew had made. He thought about his brother, standing in the grand hall of the Apex Spire, pulling off his translation device, and choosing to walk away from the most powerful table in the galaxy. "It was worth it," he said quietly. Back on Earth, Secretary Grant and Admiral Perry sat in a conference room, watching the news feeds. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Species that had never had contact with each other before were opening diplomatic channels through the framework of the Meridian Compact. Trade agreements that the Volani had blocked for decades were being signed. A group of frontier species had formed a joint patrol to protect shipping lanes without waiting for anyone's permission. Perry leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. She watched the numbers scroll across the screen, new signatories joining the compact one after another, and she allowed herself a rare smile. "I always knew the galaxy would come around," she said. "It just needed someone to walk out the door first." Grant looked at her. "You think this will last?" Perry thought about it for a moment. She thought about Nathan Cole standing up in that chamber and saying no. She thought about Diane Harper refusing to leave her home. She thought about Ryan Cole putting his ship between a flotilla and a farming world. She thought about all the species out there who had been waiting for someone to go first. "It will last," she said, "because it was not built by the powerful to control the weak. It was built by the ones who were tired of being controlled. And that is a different kind of foundation altogether." Outside the window, the sun was setting over the capital. The sky turned gold and then deep orange, and the first stars began to appear. Somewhere out there, beyond the light, the galaxy was waking up to a new morning. It was not perfect. It would not be easy. But for the first time in a very long time, every species in it had a voice, and every voice mattered. And it had all started because one man stood up, said no, and walked out of a room. The message arrived at 3 a.m, ship time. Nathan Cole was sitting alone in the small kitchen of the diplomatic vessel Ardent Horizon, drinking black coffee and reading a report on trade negotiations with the Rithani, when the communication panel on the wall began to flash red. Red meant priority. Red meant someone important wanted something fast. He set the coffee down and opened the channel. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to Secretary of Defense Kevin Grant, and the man looked like he had not slept in days. His eyes were heavy and his jaw was tight. "Nathan, we just received a formal summons from the Galactic Council. Emergency session. They want every member delegation at the Apex Spire within 48 hours. Nathan leaned back in his chair. Emergency sessions were rare. In the 12 years since humanity had joined the Council, there had only been 2, and both had involved actual wars between alien species. "What is it about?" he asked. They are calling it the Containment Accord. We do not have the full text yet, but early signals say the Volani are behind it. It is aimed at us, Nathan, specifically at us. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. The Volani Dominion was the oldest and most powerful member of the Galactic Council. They had held their seat at the top of the Galactic Order for over 800 years, and they did not do anything without careful planning. If they were pushing an emergency resolution aimed at humanity, they had already done the math, and believed they had the votes to pass it. "I will get the team together," Nathan said. "We can reach the Apex Spire in 36 hours, if we push the engines." He ended the call and went to wake the others. Laura Bennett was the first to arrive in the briefing room. She was a tall woman with short dark hair and sharp gray eyes that never seemed to miss anything. Before joining the diplomatic corps, she had spent 15 years in military intelligence, and she still carried herself with that careful stillness of someone who was always watching, always listening. She sat down across from Nathan and folded her hands on the table. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough that Grant looked scared," Nathan replied, "and that man does not scare easily." Commander Ethan Marsh came in next. He was younger than both of them, early 30s, with a solid build and a calm face that did not show much emotion. He was the military attaché assigned to protect the delegation, and he took that job very seriously. He stood near the door, with his arms at his sides, waiting. Nathan told them everything he knew, which was not much. The Volani were pushing something called the Containment Accord. It was aimed at limiting human expansion, reducing human fleet sizes, and placing alien monitoring stations inside human-controlled systems. The justification, as far as they could tell, was that humanity was growing too fast and becoming a threat to galactic stability. Laura shook her head slowly. "They have been planning this. You do not call an emergency session and draft a resolution like this overnight. This has been in the works for months, maybe longer." "Agreed," Nathan said, "which means they have already been talking to the other delegations. They would not bring this to a vote unless they were confident they could win." "So what do we do?" Ethan asked. Nathan looked at the star map on the wall. The Apex Spire was located in neutral space at the center of the galaxy, a massive station that served as the seat of the Galactic Council. Hundreds of species sent their representatives there to debate, negotiate, and occasionally threaten each other in the name of diplomacy. Humanity had earned its place at that table through years of hard work, trade agreements, and more than a few displays of military strength. The idea that the Volani could simply vote to put them in a cage made his blood run hot. But he kept his voice steady. "We go, we listen, we make our case, and we prepare for the possibility that making our case will not be enough." The ardent horizon pushed its engines hard and reached the Apex Spire with 6 hours to spare. As they approached the station, Nathan stood at the forward viewport and watched it grow larger against the stars. The Apex Spire was shaped like a great crystal tower hanging in space, lit from within by a pale blue light that made it look almost beautiful, almost peaceful. He knew better. They docked at the human berth and were met by a protocol officer from the council staff, a thin alien with 4 arms and large dark eyes, who guided them through the long corridors to the diplomatic quarters. Along the way, Nathan noticed something. The corridors were busier than usual. Delegations that normally kept to themselves were gathered in small groups, talking in low voices. Several of them glanced at the humans as they passed, and the looks were not friendly. Laura walked close to Nathan and spoke quietly. "I have been reaching out to contacts since we left. The picture is not good. The Volani have been pressuring the smaller species hard. Promises, threats, trade deals. At least a dozen delegations that were neutral toward us 6 months ago have moved into the Volani camp." "What about the Rithani?" Nathan asked. The Rithani were a mid-tier species whose economy had become closely linked with human trade over the past decade. They were the closest thing humanity had to real allies on the council. They are being cautious, Laura said. They do not want to anger the Villani, but they also know that losing access to human markets would hurt them badly. They are sitting on the fence. And the Dravosi? The Dravosi respect strength. Right now they are watching to see what we do. Nathan nodded. He had expected as much. That evening, Laura came to his quarters with a datapad. She had managed to get a leaked draft of the containment accord through one of her intelligence contacts, and the details were worse than they had feared. The accord would restrict human expansion to a narrow corridor of space that contained fewer than 30 systems. Human military vessels would be reduced to a fraction of their current numbers, and every human system would be required to accept a permanent monitoring station operated by a council-appointed authority, which in practice meant the Villani. This is not a containment, Nathan said, reading through the text. This is a cage. It gets worse, Laura said. I dug into the real numbers. The trade routes that the Accord would cut us off from are the same routes that the Villani have been losing market share on for the past 5 years. Human merchants have been undercutting Villani trading houses across dozens of systems. This is not about security, Nathan. This is about money. This is about the Villani losing their grip on galactic commerce and using the Council to get it back. Nathan set the datapad down and looked at the wall. He thought about the 200 billion human beings spread across their worlds, building lives, raising families, reaching out into the dark between the stars, because that was what humans did. They reached. They always reached. Get Ethan, he said quietly. We need to talk about what happens if the vote goes against us. All of it. Every option. Laura studied his face for a moment. She had known Nathan for a long time, and she could see something in his eyes that she had only seen once before, during the border crisis with the Korath 3 years ago. It was the look of a man who was already thinking several steps ahead, and did not like where the path was leading. She nodded and left the room. Nathan sat alone in the silence of his quarters, and stared at the pale blue glow of the apex spire through his window. Tomorrow he would stand before the most powerful gathering in the galaxy and fight for his species' right to exist on its own terms. He did not know if words would be enough. He feared they would not. But he would try, because that was what diplomats did before the soldiers had their turn. He picked up his coffee. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway.